because I wanted to have a welfare state, a state that takes care of its people. And secondly, rule of law. These were the two things that drove me into politics. Because, the first state built by our Holy Prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him, he built the first state in Medina, and that for all Muslims was the ideal state, what we consider the golden age of the Muslim history. And he built that state on these two principles. It was the first ever welfare state in the history of mankind, and it had rule of law. Everyone was equal before law. So that was my motivation, really, for going into politics.
And I'm glad you mentioned Islam, because I think that also there's a conception of, as we all know, of Islam in the West that's been shaped by media, that's been shaped by conflict, that's been shaped by extremism and so on. And, the Muslim history that I've read suggests that, it was in fact a social welfare state, if you will. But that aspect, and the spiritual, you might say, rather than the religious or structural, hardly authoritarian. I mean, as I understand it, even in the Prophet's time, there were shura, there were councils, there was, it was not by any means authoritarian. If this is a model, how should people in a country like mine view that? In other words, in my country, for example, Bernie Sanders is very popular, and I worked for Bernie, and he was very much an advocate of national community, of a social welfare state, of political democracy, of so on. And while he's not overtly a member of any religion per se, very spiritual in his own way, a great admirer of spiritual leaders like Pope Francis when he speaks about poverty and so on. So how should people like that view, let's say, a movement like yours?
Look, Richard, there are two worldviews. One is the material, what some of capitalists say that, it's greed that drives the world. And so because there's greed, you make more and more profits, and eventually it trickles down to the people. That's one worldview. The other is the spiritual worldview, where you feel that the reason you're different to the animal world, humans are different to animals for two reasons only. In human community, there is justice. In animal world, there is might is right. In human community, there is compassion. In animal kingdom, there is survival of the fittest. So we differ to the animal world. And our religion, our book, the Holy Quran, tells us that, human was God's greatest creation. But it says that, when a human is human, he rises above the angels. But when he falls, he goes below the level of animals, because animals don't have greed. Humans have insatiable greed. So human can fall below the level of the animals. So therefore, simple way of explaining to people is that societies that have compassion, in my view, are spiritual. Societies that care about justice. And justice, why justice? Because justice means the weak need to be protected from the strong. That's why you have rule of law. That's why the more civilized a society, the more rule of law it has. So if you ask me what in the world today is nearer to the Muslim ideal, which countries, I would say the Scandinavian countries. I would actually say New Zealand. I would even say Switzerland. Because these countries basically have the most important thing for a civilized society, which is compassion and justice. Unfortunately, societies where you encourage greed, this is the problem of the world right now. The environmental problems in the world are simply because of naked greed, where humans never have enough. And unfortunately, with the spirituality diminishing in the world gradually, I'm saying over a few hundred years, the spiritual sense, the spiritual world has been restricted. Actually, in a way, it has been replaced by what I call the environmental movement or the green movement or the climate change movement. It's people caring for other people. Whereas on the other side are these, people who never have enough, naked greed.
This may be a bit parenthetical or perhaps not, but I've read some of the history of Islam and of Muhammad and the stories, the hadith, the stories about him. The first one I read when I opened a book was randomly, which stunned me in a way, was a story about the Prophet telling someone that when they wash themselves ritually in water, not to waste the water, even if it's in a running river, which to me suggests, the river's fine either way, but it suggests that an attitude of the human being towards nature is one of respect and non-wastefulness. And it seems to me that's related to what you're saying, perhaps, is it?
Well, planting a tree. According to the Holy Prophet, if you plant a tree, you will always, what is the word now? The Almighty will bless you, because everyone who benefits from that tree which you planted, even after you die, it will be counted as you will be blessed because of that. So, the emphasis on environment. There's a verse in the Quran which specifically says, tread softly on this world. Tread softly on this world. So, do not leave this big footprint on the world. Respect nature. His whole life was that of not extravagance. He lived even when, he started from very few followers, and then just before the end of his life, he became the master of the whole of Arabia, and riches were flowing in from everywhere. But he never changed his lifestyle. He lived very austere, lived according to his needs, and any extra money would go to the poor people. So he set this example of living as a decent human being on this earth. And unfortunately, always in the history of mankind, there was always the struggle between those who tried to live for others and had compassion, and those who lived the animal way of life.